we're live. Welcome to the Best in Slot podcast, a Warcraft podcast by the community for the community. I'm your main host, Sparty. I'm here with my co-host, Midgettes. Midgettes, how are you on this fine Sunday evening?
Doing really well. I think everybody's sort of excited or really mad. It depends on which football team they like.
This is true. Apparently, the refs called the game. I don't know. It's one of those football, sports ball things. I don't follow it too much, but I do follow my Twitter feed and how angry or how happy people get. So that's always a fun one.
Not a big sports fan myself, but it was a close game. I do know that.
That's good. There's also the Super Red Wolf Blood Moon, whatever it is, tonight. So that should be pretty exciting for those of you that are, nerds and not too keen on the sports ball stuff. But we also have our podcast, and we have a Coach's Corner coming up tonight soon. So this is episode 54, and today we'll be talking about the Battle of Dazar'alor, preparing your team for a new raid. You know what? I really don't like that name. I keep calling it...
I don't either. I can't ever remember it.
I keep calling it Dazar'alor, which, like, dazzling R'hllor, whatever, but it rolls off the tongue so much better than Dazar'alor, right? Dazar'alor sounds so much better. Anyway.
Okay, well, I have a better solution. I just call it the new raid.
BOD or BD or, I don't know, BM,
whatever. I'll be curious to see what the community comes up for. I can't wait for the shortened version.
I'm sure it'll just be BOD or something, or I'm sure there'll be some memes coming out very soon, and we'll see how the tuning is. But yeah, so first part of the stream is what?
Your joke.
Well,
it's something I look forward to every week.
Okay, I'm going to pull one off of, we actually have a section on our Discord here for jokes. This one, we probably said this one before, but I will do it again. What do you call a deer with no eyes?
I have no idea what.
That's right. No idea. No idea.
Goodness.
You walked right into it. Yes, that is good. I have no idea. Yeah, you were pretty close there. So, what is new in the community? So, besides our awesome jokes?
Well, the most important thing, and hey, we had it last year, so we want to do it again. The Call of Scarab starts tomorrow through the 23rd.
Is that tomorrow? That's so exciting.
Tomorrow.
I mean, like,
it's very important because we want the Alliance logo all over the place.
It seems so silly that, well, not that they put any of these release dates around Call of the Scarab, but the 22nd and 23rd we're gonna be really busy. Like, I don't know how many casuals there'll be out there farming Scarab stuff on the 22nd, 23rd. Okay, there might be some people doing it tomorrow, so whichever faction has more dirty casuals,
because I still want it to be Alliance.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, hopefully the people that are around tomorrow can go farm some scarabs and do whatever is, because we want to see Alliance flags and not those dirty hordes. But yes, we do have the Tides of Vengeance coming up, and what do we have to really supplement that? What kind of resources are there around?
Well, I think if you look at the Warcraft for front page, of course, they have the Tides of Vengeance survival guide, and it talks about everything that's coming out. And it started really on December, 11th? But now we're heading into Season 2. What does Season 2 bring for us? Well, it brings us the new raid, which is part of what we're going to be talking about. And then a lot of other exciting things. But you can start with the Tides of Vengeance survival guide. And then the community, obviously, Wowhead has some great tools as well and guides.
Yeah, for sure. We'll link that one there in the channel for you guys. So the YouTube there is fantastic. I mean, it's a good survival guide of what's next, what's coming up here. Season 2, what's coming with it, things to be aware of. But there's a lot, though, right? I mean, we have the new raid, of course, which we're going to call Battle of Dazar'alor. That's the way I'm going to pronounce it from now on. We have new mounts, the G-mod from High Tinker Mechatork, which is a badass mount. Like, I love
Isn't
that
it
thing.
Cool?
It's amazing. One of the coolest mounts by, like, how can I retire from raiding with a mount like that around, right?
Right.
The Wind Weaver's around, the Glacial Tidestorm, right? That's the Jaina mount, I believe. I mean...
Now, don't forget the pets.
Oh, well, how can we forget the pets? We do have you. So we have the spawn of Kragwa, with Thunder, and Lizard Runts, and, like, Child of Paku, and there's some new recipes, right? I saw one of my Clouds. Clouds has a weird little gnomish monk transmog. He had like these two awesome claws and this hideous tiki mask. I wonder if this one's any better.
I'm not sure how to take that conversation about clouds and weird looking gnomes. And Right,
Well,
I'm just gonna go right past that. It's a recipe to make a pet, which is an enchanted tiki beast.
oh, yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense for enchanters to make a I thought it was
But if
for
you
like
want
a
to
cloth
talk
maker.
about the new armor sets, which I'm
Yeah,
not even going to try to say that word.
the Buon Swamdi,
Yeah, that
Buon
thing.
Samdi.
That looks like a
I
rejected
again,
bird
I don't know.
contest. I'm not wearing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I again, I'm not sold on some of these tier sets. It is sure flavorful of whatever the tier is. Um, I don't know. I'm
I
not a
don't know
fan
that we
of
can
this
call
look.
them tier sets anymore, though.
Well, they are like they're raid tier sets. They just don't have tier bonuses, right? They're still raid tier sets, as we did talk about like 20 episodes ago, right? Like they're not taking it all
Well, we
away.
could we
Don't
could we
get so
could get
butthurt.
people worked up about that.
Yeah, well, whatever. So there's also new crowns. What are these new crowns?
Ugly. Okay, there's some cosmetic crowns in there, but they're horrid. I was not impressed. Let's just say when midgets went and looked at all of the new armor that's coming out with the new raid, I said, well, I'll be transmogging to older stuff. But there are some crowns.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I mean, the it's probably for the horde because they have a really crappy, undesirable town, city, whatever it is, and we have Browse, which is amazing. So they're like,
So
okay,
they get the
we
crowns.
messed up designing their stupid town. Let's give them some ugly crowns, right? I mean, that should make them happy. They, not as if they're very smart anyway. So the other really cool stuff that's coming back is, of course, the artifact knowledge returning. My hope is that it starts again tomorrow, Tuesday rather,
It
and
does
not the week
start again
after.
tomorrow.
Yes,
It
Tuesday.
does start again tomorrow.
Yeah, that's awesome. Which is great for those of you that love AP or don't like AP and want to continue on with your artifact power stuff or your Azurite power rather. We keep calling it artifact power, which is great because those of us that want to keep chugging away one level at a time, it makes it really manageable. And for those of people that are coming back or coming into the game much later, it makes it so much easier to really catch up in terms of Azurite power. So that's great. What else do we have? Oh, we have the
Of
sorry.
We have your armor cap's coming up to 425.
Yes,
And then
yes.
you have the fifth ring on your Azurite armor.
So those LFR heroes out there, are you guys excited? You're gonna do LFR, and you're gonna Titan Forge. You're gonna get hit by lightning, then win the lottery, and then one of your trinkets gonna Titan Forge to 425, and all the Mythic Raiders will be so upset. They'll be just so upset.
Well, it's only fun if you get to do it to upset people, right?
Well,
It's
of
not about your
course.
personal accomplishments or
Yeah,
anything.
no, not at all. I mean, it's a trinket.
Okay, what about the Mythic Plus?
So of course we have the new affixes, which is Reaping, which had some last minute testing. Uh, that was interesting to see.
Which will go over well.
Yeah, I'm sure go over really well, and there'll be a lot of changes. People that do Mythic Pluses or Mythics in general, just be aware that the dungeon difficulty of all Mythics are increasing by roughly 30%, right? So you're going to have much better drops. I think it's the equivalent of like doing a +7 will give you 385 gear, which is awesome. But expect the difficulty to be that much higher. So if you're doing 15s before, you'll probably be doing 10s or something like that. And of course, the Mythic Cache will be 410 next week. So get your 10s done. I believe it's 10s anyway. Done this week to get your 410 piece. And then the other
Now,
really
keep in mind, be very clear. It's going to be the same piece. You're going to get a season 1 piece in tomorrow's raid reset. So you
yes,
won't see a season 2 piece until the
the
next
following the
raid
29th.
reset.
That's right. So
And that's the same thing for the war fronts and everything else. They've gated that.
yeah. So ideally, the Alliance will not contribute to the Warfront, so we get the Dark Shore stuff later on, right? That's the hope. But yeah, the other really cool stuff, of course,
Well, I don't think that would work. I saw that on the forums. I saw somebody posting about that. But if they've got it gated so it won't come out until next week, don't we want to get it circled through faster?
well, I guess we could like really delay to just not contribute anything, and then just not as if
Yeah,
there's.
I have faith that they'll somehow go.
I know. I'm sure there are people. Well, we're all contributing because we all want the AP stuff anyway, right? That's our little carrot on the stick. Um, but yes, so the other really cool thing, of course, with Azurite armor is, we got rid of that stupid, what is it, the laser matrix and the what is that? I just specked out of it. The other one, that gives 20
I don't
stacks.
know.
Everyone knows what I'm
You're,
talking
you,
about. It's on the tip of my tongue. But that's all gone, thankfully. We are now fifth ring of Azurite armor, so you can double up. Well, not double up, but you'll have additional, class or spec specific traits, which is awesome. Thank you, Reorigination Array, Archive, whatever we call it. So yeah, so we'll have those, and those of you that have been simming your characters, and hopefully you see that, hey, with this extra ring, like even on crappier gear, because I have these extra traits, it's probably better. So the season two, I guess, or raid level 2 gear, whatever you want to call it, well, it should be considerably better. So that should be awesome. And hopefully people have been catching or keeping up with their AP so they can actually use the pieces, right? Because, if you're doing heroics, for instance, and, you have 35 traits or 34 traits, you can't use all of your pieces, right? You can't use the, the DPS or the healer rings to the fullest extent. So hopefully people have been catching up with those as well.
Well, and it's my understanding that the drops are supposed to have better stats within
Yes.
the mythics as well.
Yeah, and I mean
Uh,
the other big thing is lots of stamina because with more stamina you can survive the abilities a lot better. And even though some of these old pieces might sim better at the start, the stamina is really hard to replace because when you're doing progression in a mythic environment, you want every bit of stamina that you can take.
right? So we'll be curious to see how it comes in the days and weeks ahead, but I don't think we're going to be able to control who has what warfront for those 410 pieces. I
You can
think
only
that's
hope,
going to
but
sort
yeah.
of. We can try. Worst thing that can happen is we
hmm
can try. Now,
so what
there's
about the
also,
professions? Yeah, go ahead on the
yeah,
profession
there was
front.
some new profession changes. So you're going to have some new crafting regions,
Uh huh.
which is the title core and the breath of, I'm not saying that word, so you all can.
Buon Samdi.
Well,
We're gonna call
yeah,
it
there
Buon
you
Samdi. Yeah.
go. Now, the alchemist stone, it has some healer interest.
Ah. So finally, I mean, on the Holy Paladin page, we have our own spreadsheet updated, and the new Alchemy Stone is probably one of the best trinkets you can get by far, the 415 version. Um, it seems really, really mandatory. To the extent where we might get another Candlegate scenario and it's going to get nerfed. If you're a healer, you probably want this trinket. It is, if you're an alchemist, you absolutely want to be using it or be switching to alchemy because it is so damn good, comparable to a lot of, high-end mythic trinkets. I mean, for me, it's ranking right now tied for fourth best with like a 410 Dino Bone Charm. So it's quite good. And of course, the chance of getting a 410 Dynamo Charm is like astronomical. So yeah,
And
by
now,
far
as
one
you
of the
watch,
best
all
trinkets.
of the healers' profession change to alchemists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like if you're not an alchemist, this trinket is damn good, and you probably want to be switching to an alchemy healer. So I highly encourage you to do it in the next day. And those of you that are auction house people, I highly encourage you to raise some alchemist prices.
Well, keep in mind that if you're not an alchemist, you can't use it.
That's right. Yeah, well, for people that are trying to level it to get it up there. I mean, these new profession reagents should be okay. I don't know. I think they really dropped the ball with professions this expansion, and it's been a lot of like, hey, expulsum, we want some, we can't get any. Hey, we have all these friggin' sanguicells or whatever. What are we gonna do with them? Like they're just sitting, whatever. Oh, we can make some sausages. Great. Do I need 1,000 sausages? Not really.
Don't get me started on ultramarine pigment, but there,
Yeah.
you know, we have our own problems. The other interesting piece, though, was this unstable temporal time shifter.
So what is this? So it's an engineering thing, but it's an unstable temporal time shifter. Yeah, see that 10 times fast. So what does it do?
Well, it appears to be a battle res if it works.
So I mean
But
that's
if it doesn't work, we're going to have a lot of science.
oh yeah, we'll have a lot of science. So this is an engineering item where you are able to battle res essentially, and it's funny because I was going through our coach's corner videos and just going through a lot of different guilds. Videos on PTR, and somebody's like, "Hey, try to res this person or this person," and they're like, "There's nobody left that can res." And how many times have you guys ever been in that situation where, hey, all the resers are dead because they all died for whatever reason, or they were too busy DPSing or healing in order to res somebody else, right? And so you've definitely missed out on that res. So to have engineers with this battle res, cool. I mean, I don't see why not. I think engineers should have these kind of perks because I mean, engineering is great. We need
Well, and
people dropping those
it's not
mailboxes.
just an engineering only item. It's one that anybody can use.
Oh, anybody can use
And
it. Even better.
yes, anybody can use it. Now, here's where I see a real use for it too, as Mythic Plus. But
Ah.
here's the tooltips for it, which is reverses the flow of time on a target that recently died, restoring them to life with 60% health and 20% mana.
Mm-hmm.
Castable in combat. Here's the catch. Chance to backfire, fast forwarding the flow of time on a target, resulting in a loss of vitality, and it has a 10-minute cooldown.
So you want to use this, you want to res somebody, but there's a chance to backfire and kill you.
Again.
I can't wait to see that like in an MDI setting. I mean, if only, right? That's never going to happen. But could you imagine that in an MDI setting or whatever, like people are trying to combat res, but the jumper cables backfire and they shock you and they kill you? That'd be friggin' hilarious.
It is going to be awesome. So it's definitely one that I mentioned to you guys, and I can't wait to see it in action. We'll have to do some science.
Mm-hmm.
What about? I heard your friend Morgan Day was in an interview with Forbes.
Yeah, so Morgan Day, I interviewed or I did a bit of a stream with him back at PAX East last year. Really awesome developer, had some really cool insights on the game. I'm happy to chat about them later on. But yeah, super nice dude. Like, can only say good things about him. But yeah, so he had an interview with Forbes. Him and J.B from Method, I believe, the Druid healer. So they had an interview. The interview, I mean, it was good and things we already knew. I had a lot of issues with the like the grammar and the spelling, and a lot of just the context of the interview. I thought it was a really poorly done interview, but I mean, I don't know how Forbes does it. It must have been sent out to somebody else and then submitted to Forbes. I tweeted the author. I'm like, hey, there's some grammatical issues here. Like, this should not be on Forbes. This should be on like BuzzFeed or I don't know what like TMZ or something, right? Like
Go
this
back
is
to schoolblog.com.
yeah, like it's so unprofessional. Anyway, besides that, it was a pretty solid interview with Mythic Plus Dungeons and Changes competition stuff. A lot of theory behind why they do some of the things they do. So it was interesting to get a bit of an insight. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I enjoy a lot of the developers interviews. I can honestly say that I've not been overly fond of the Forbes interviews, mostly because I feel like their specialty isn't gaming, and
Yeah.
their articles come off that way.
Yeah, and
Um, and I do expect more from Forbes than what I saw in that article.
yeah, it's like people that criticize Warcraft, but they don't play Warcraft, right? Like you get that from a lot of streamers and podcasters that like, hey, this and this game sucks, or this sucks about Warcraft, but I don't really play Warcraft. I just I hear it sucks, or I hear from other people it sucks. But speaking of insights of developers, my John Stats book finally came in. I'm gonna have to open it on stream a little bit later. So they did arrive on
Oh,
Canada.
did you get yours? Isn't Oh well, you haven't
I haven't
opened
opened
it
it
yet.
yet,
It's
so I will
really
open it on
cool.
stream. Yeah, it's basically the Warcraft diary of Warcraft being made back in the early 2000s, and the developers going to different studios and their reason for different things and how things broke and they fixed. Like it's incredible. So it's great to have that kind of insight on a game that I've been playing for 14 years now, and so it was in development for so much earlier by by Tiggle, Jeff Kaplan, and Alex Fraziasby and all those other guys. So it's I'm excited to see some of these insights.
Well, just one thing to note: do be careful with opening it because he's had a
Yes, I
lot of
heard.
people damaging it.
Yeah, I know people apparently don't know how to open boxes with
Don't know
books in
how to
them.
open boxes
Just
without cutting into them.
yeah,
I hear you.
I mean, what do you do? Use a blowtorch next? Like, how do you not? I don't know. Anyway, people are the average person.
Well, I don't know how to segue into this, but one of the last things before we jump into our topic
Mm-hmm.
was I came across there's this new rate composition tool on
Mm-hmm.
Wowhead, and it's really cool. Have you gone and checked it out?
I have not, but hopefully our raid leads have in Zeros to Heroes and DJs. It is pretty cool at the start. I mean, we've had add-ons like this in the past that tracked, hey, do you have these buffs? Do you have these debuffs? Do you have these interrupt silences? What are they? I can't remember what it was. It was a little raid check little add-on that I used years ago. I can't recall the name of it. But I mean, this tool or this comp tool is pretty cool. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's really nice because I'd love to see it have more of an in-game application because that would make it a lot
Oh, I
easier.
know.
But
Could
you
you?
can sit there and make sure that you have all your buffs instead of going, well, do I have, so, and I'll give you an example. When our raid lead was putting together our roster, he had a fight with no warriors and no mages. So we're scrambling to make our fake ones. Fortunately, we have the battle shout and intellect tomes that you can put out. But it would really help so that you make sure you have all the buffs in the raid.
Yeah, so the add-on I'm actually thinking of is called Raid Checklist, as it comes back to my memory. And this raid composition tool is almost exactly the same. The Raid Checklist was better because you could actually see in game rather than having to alt tab into a thing here, right? But what they need next is they need to develop an add-on that allows you to to set your comps in game and get that going there rather than we all have spreadsheets, right? Like, oh, who's in for this boss? It's all in spreadsheets. Well, let's just get it in game. Let's figure something out to make it work, right? And not be switching between our 3 4 monitors.
Well, that's why we have 3 or 4 monitors, right?
That's exactly right. You have Discord and chat and your spreadsheets and everything else. So uh,
Well, and bringing that up, that's one of the reasons tonight's podcast is we're going to sort of introduce what your favorite thing is, which is Coach's Corner.
I love
And
Coach's
we're
Corner.
going to sort of start here, and you're going to finish out. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so back by popular demand, we bring back these Coaches Corners, which we have a lot of back content to get through. We do have the first half of the bosses in a coach's corner format. So we'll be going through the videos, explanations, things to watch out for, things to things to really break these down to the simplest ways to explain these bosses and the simplest ways to learn them and to defeat them ultimately. So that should be fun. But I mean, we're getting to the crux of our topic, which is preparing for this next tier. And there's lots. We've talked about preparation in the past, and people getting their stuff and there's so many resources out there, right? There's so many things that people can be using, and we have 10 different guides and spreadsheets that we have linked to you guys, between Wowhead, and there's plenty of guides out there. But people always make these fantastic little ability spreadsheets and strat spreadsheets, so we have those as well. One of the big things that you need to be looking at as well is, well, going into a big patch, right? There are some class changes. There's Azurite changes. If you haven't been playing for the past couple of months, there's likely some big changes coming in store for you in the next Tuesday here, right? So a lot of those, well, where would you go, Midgets? If you have been playing for the past couple of months, where would you go for some of those resources?
I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm going to go to the class discords.
Okay.
But over the years, and in my opinion, Wowhead has come out as the front runner of having at least those beginning areas. And because those, each one of the individual class guides, most of them are written by the theory crafters that are the heads or moderators of those discords. So that's where I start. And then I go to the discords for more in depth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Wowheads is one of the best starting points for, looking at some of the changes. They usually have, hey, what's changed between 8.0 and 8.1, 8.1 and 8.2 kind of deals. These guides are often written by very prominent players, so players that know what they're talking about and have proven ability to play at that level. So it's coming from somebody. Not that necessarily you need to be a good player to have really good theory crafting. A lot of really great theory crafters are necessarily high-end progression raiders. Anyway, so lots of resources out there. Wowhead's good. Noxic probably not the best one to use. Icy Veins is another alternative that some people use. But yeah, class discords, get some questions in there. Start asking, hey, what's new? What's changed? A lot of them have the FAQ channels. At least the Paladin one is really good with that now, where, hey, this has changed. Here's the spreadsheet. Here's the breakdown of these are your stat weights or these are your stat priorities. These are the best Azurite traits in a Mythic Plus setting or in a raid setting, and do it that way. So lots of things to cover.
That I'm seeing a lot less of the class-specific websites. There's some of the older ones that are still around.
Do people still use them? I mean, yeah, I guess what, like Ravenholt's still around, and there was the Moonkin repository somewhere.
Well, and How to Priest has changed to another one.
Yeah.
But I've become more comfortable. I start with I do a lot of, because my theory crafting is priest. I follow Automatic Jack, and he does so much with that. That's sort of where I have drifted. And now I still think it's a real strong resource for Shadow Priest, but I'm a healing priest.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, you have these high-end streamers like Jack, who are a huge resource to the priest community, right? Whether you're a disc or holy or whatever, a guy like him, he's always around to answer questions and be really helpful to players. But yeah, I mean, this is where you go. You have Twitch as a huge resource to, hey, you see, a decent player out there, ask them those questions. So those are good opportunities to really learn from some of the better players out there as well. Well, what about gear planning, right? So, one thing we have in DJs is and part of this is to make our lives easier when we're setting compositions, is your best in slot list, right? Your best in slot list of, well, my best gear drops from this boss. And yes, your best gear could drop off a Mythic Plus. You could totally Titan Forge a, 425 trinket from, from Shrine and spend another 2 hours in Shrine. But we have these best in slot lists. That's funny. Our podcast best in slot. We have these spreadsheets set up. So hey, Sparty needs the trinket from this boss, or Midgets needs the weapon from this boss. That's her best in slot weapon or best in slot staff. So that's, we have those lists. Do you use a best in slot list?
Um, no, I'm really bad about gear, Sparty.
I mean, listen,
I
some
don't.
people are
I
all
want
about
you
what
to
looks
know.
better, and that's fine too, right? Like the better you look, the more damage and healing you do. That's all that matters, and that's why we have transmogs.
Well, no, they were giving me a hard time. So I was giving our raid leader a hard time. And keep in mind, we're a lot more casual than
Yeah,
you
yeah.
guys are. But I was giving our raid leader a hard time because it's his alt and he's only sitting at like 31 or 32 on his neck. And he said, "How do you have that eye level?" And I said, "Well, I sold this piece for the guild stores, and I gave this one to somebody else so that they could get the residium." And so I sort of give my gear away because I don't care about it that much.
Yeah, and that's fair, right? Like that's totally fair. So, well, how do you find best in slot though, right? Like, how do you
I go
find?
to the discords.
Okay,
I mean, honestly, if you go, most of the discords and healers are different. So, and I'll let you speak to what Scan had found today.
mm-hmm.
But for healers are a little bit different because we don't necessarily use things like SimSeed.
Yeah,
And so a lot of times we just go with lists and how the trink. Wait till the theory crafters come out with their lists. And the big things that I watch obviously are my stats, and then of course I watch for the best trinkets. And those are probably where I put my most focus. And then past that, I sort of don't care.
yeah. So from a Holy Paladin perspective, the for those of you Holy Paladins out there, the 8.1 spreadsheet is now live thanks to Rhino and all those other Holy Paladin dudes that have theory crafted it, which is fantastic. As a healer, though, we have sort of our list. We have our own, like the Holy Paladins have a spreadsheet, which is fantastic. Some of their classes have some great resources. You guys can chime in there. And how do you find out what's best? Well, you sim it, right? Like you go to SimCraft, you go to Raidbots, and you sim that stuff. What new thing that Simbot has come up with, and this is thanks to one of our guildies, Vax, that threw it on our radar here, is something called Droptimizer, which basically does what? It sims so based off your gear or whatever, what are the best drops for you and where they drop from. So for those of you listening, go to raidbots.com and look at the Droptimizer setting. It is really cool. It might take you a little while if you're not a premium member, but check it out. It is pretty cool for planning some of your best pieces, because sometimes your best in slot changes depending on what gear you have, right? Or what Azurites traits you have. So there's no, best in slot piece for, the entirety or forever. It may change depending on the rest of your gear and how your gear sims, right? How much haste you have or crit you have or mastery or whatever. So this little thing, Droptimizer, makes your life a lot easier when you're planning out your gear. So on a weekly basis, any player can go into Droptimizer and then preset their best in slot list, right? So oftentimes in previous best in slot lists, for those of you who have been reading for a while, of, hey, you know what? This helmet has crit haste. This helmet has mastery verse. Well, you know what? Mastery verse sucks for Holy Paladins, so my best helmet is the crit haste one. So that helmet is going to be on my best in slot list. The other one, I'm only going to take if nobody else needs it, right? And it's an upgrade. So that's how we used to set our best in slot lists, based off those drops. But now we have more of the math behind it, which is awesome.
Well, and that math is important. I thought it was really neat. And I know that at one point Ask Mr. Robot had one, but I haven't touched it in years, so I don't know how good it is.
Yeah, I'm honestly not familiar
Um,
with that one. I know there's one that was around for a while, but yeah, I have not seen the Ask Mr. Robot one.
but I'll tell you another secret. Wowhead in their guides,
Mm-hmm.
they also have your best pieces.
They do, yeah, which is awesome. And I know from a
Yeah.
Holy Paladin perspective, that was great. And then of course sometimes it changes depending on the situation. In the Mythic Plus setting, well, this trinket's better, or this gear is better, or these talents are better, right? So there's never a one size fits all answer for all these things. It depends on the situation. That is always the case. It always depends.
Well,
So,
another way to do it is if you go and look at the logs, especially you can go see what gear they're getting.
hmm
And you'll start seeing patterns. So even if you don't go to these resources or you're not a theory crafter, if you're looking at the logs, it'll show you. And big one for me, at least, has always been the trinkets, what trinkets they're using.
yeah.
Okay, 50 priests have the trinket out of Waycrest Manor. Probably should look at that.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, right? So you don't have to be a theory crafter to prepare yourself for these raids or prepare yourself for the next boss. You go to Warcraft logs, it'll tell you, hey, the priests that are successful, the paladins that are successful on this fight, they are generally using these traits, these talents, and these trinkets. Why? Well, it won't tell you why, but you go to your Discord and you ask them, hey, why is everybody using this talent or this trinket or this trait? People are going to tell you exactly why, right? So, again, the resources are there. Warcraft logs is a great one where you can just see all those things and sort by, most popular things or whatever. But yeah, those are fantastic to use. The other big thing is the Azurite Residuum, right? You haven't been saving up much, is what you've been saying?
No.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, I've got, I don't know, a bunch of hundred Residuum. Not that it's going to be that helpful. So one of the things is planning out your Residuum pieces, right? So if you're a high-end Mythic Plus player, and I love the new system of Residuum being able to purchase some of this stuff. I wish it was a different thing entirely, but it's great because for those of you that have some Residuum, where you're looking to get some. The one of the best things to buy initially is the 415 rings, and now you can get random pieces or targeted pieces. So that's I can get random shoulders or random helm or my best in slot helm or my best in slot ring. Well, because of how strong the rings generally are, it is generally advantageous to just buy a random ring rather than spending so much more Residuum for a very specific ring. So generally speaking, it'll be a huge upgrade regardless.
And
Where
just to quantify, when you're speaking of rings, you're talking about rings on your three
Yes,
Azurite
rings on your
armor
fingers. No, I'm
pieces.
talking about rings on your fingers. So
No.
yeah.
Oh, you
So
can get rings from it?
am I crazy? Because you can get any
I don't
pieces.
know. I don't pay attention. I wait for you guys to tell
Oh
me.
well. So generally, you want to be picking up any pieces, right? Like whether it be, yeah. So freezing here is saying like it's 165 for random 385, and it's typically triple that for some of the later ones. So generally speaking, you want to get the ones that are going to be an upgrade for you. And when you want to target them is once you have enough, so you're not wasting it in general. Sorry, I misspoke. It's Azurite gear, not rings. I meant for the
Yeah, it's the
yeah, yeah,
rings
yeah.
on the Azurite
No, no,
gear.
I
You're
misspoke. I
confusing
had something
me.
else in my brain. Something else. I'm thinking about the old. What is it? The old. You know how we had the Residuum for just the random pieces and stuff. What was the last resource that we used on this on the holy ship in Legion? What was it called? Do you remember? I
No.
don't know what that resource was, but that's what I mean. Like, whatever. I confused them. Moving on. So you generally want to we want picking up the random 415 pieces that are that are better for you, and then once you've gone through a couple of mythic iterations or heroic iterations, that is when you want to start targeting some of the stuff. Nedlet Crest, well, yeah, the Vindicar, Nedlet Crucible, all that stuff. It was Veiled Argonite. Thank you, Darnath. It was a Veiled Argonite. So that's what it was. And of course, there's plenty of Mythic Plus upgrades. You'll have to be doing a lower key to be getting a 385, and there's lots of things to get done. But yeah, I mean the pieces generally aren't changing in terms of trinkets and things like that. The item level will, or the Titan Fortune cap will. So lots of prep to do in terms of gearing and prepping your own characters, and of course there's lots of resources to start preparing for the next bosses. And you know what? Like we go to a lot of interviews, so I have a lot of interviews for applicants to Death Jesters, and we have a player that is, let's say, 5 out of 8 or 7 out of 8 or whatever, and we ask them, oh, okay, cool. So how much prep have you done for for Gahoon, and how much prep have you done for the next bosses? They've done none. So I'm like, okay, so raid's coming out next week. Have you done zero prep? Like, how are you planning on squeezing in all of that prep to be fully fleshed out in the next 24 hours? Like, how is it possible that you can be fully ready to the level that we would expect in that time? So, I mean, hopefully people have done their prep, and this is something you should be doing as players, right? Respectful of everybody else's time. you want to be putting in the effort to ensure you know the bosses well enough. You don't necessarily like, I would never expect my players to know every single ability and what it's called, right? Like, I know there's a slam and there's a bleed on Gronk, right? Like, I don't need to know the exact names of the abilities. I need to know what they do and how to counteract them. And that's the level of prep that I would expect of most Mythic Raiders, right? And, we want players that are going to think for themselves and not just little soldier lemmings. So should be fun. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
well, it should be fun. But the big part of the planning is really on a leadership side because as an individual, you need to get yourself prepped. But as on a leader, you need to get your team prepped. So let's
Yes.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So every tier I feel is is a learning opportunity, right, for your leadership team or your officers or your vets or your class leads or whatever you have, right? Every tier is full of mistakes. Yes, Method got world first and they streamed the crap out of it. That was awesome. But I bet they made plenty of mistakes and plenty of learnings that they're going to take into next year to make it even better, right? To make it more efficient, to minimize the amount of attempts that it takes to kill a boss or whatever, and hopefully Blizzard hasn't screwed up fetid tuning or whatever it is. But there's always something to learn from. So Death Jesters was on pace for a US 65th kill. At 3 days a week, a strict 3 days, not a degenerate 4 or 5 days a week that other guilds were doing with the Overwatch or the Overtime Police. And then, of course, Halloween hit and BlizzCon hit, and we lost like 30 ranks. But so, what are some of the learnings from that? Well, one of the learnings was we were short a warlock. We could not do Gahoon because we would only have had one warlock and would have had to relearn so much more. Okay, so what is our big learning from that? Well, we probably need more warlocks. We really need to bolster our roster, right? Really need to plan out our raid a little bit better. So those are little things that happen, but there's always something to learn from when planning out for a raid tier. So one of the things that we often look at is strats, and every single raid tier, every single raid expansion, we've tried to really build upon our strats. Whether it be our spreadsheets, how we're preparing our raiders, because ultimately, if your team isn't prepped, well, whose fault is that, right? Like, is it little Midget's fault because she didn't do all the research that a raid lead did, or is it the raid lead's fault because they didn't give their raiders enough tools, right? Those tools to succeed. And generally, I believe, the raid leads should be supporting the team everywhere, right? You don't want to be going into a raid tier where everyone has, different add-ons, different weak auras, and nobody knows what's going on, right? And yeah, you've seen the Fat Boss video, but that's it. So one of the things that we've done over the years is we've done these little strat groups, and these strat groups are fantastic because we assign, a veteran, a member, a couple laps, to a specific boss. So let's say, champion of light, the first boss, and your job is to, really develop the strategy for this. And yeah, you've seen Fat Boss and you've seen all these other guides. Okay, cool. So where is the boss going to be tanked? Why is the boss going to be tanked there? What are you going to do for the ads? What are you going to do in terms of cooldowns? When do you want a hero? How do you want to separate, different cooldowns and DPS cooldowns and that kind of stuff? And so your job is to really teach the rest of the raid that boss because you are the experts on that boss. And what I found over the years is that this cultivates much better players overall. So rather than, Sparty, raid leading and saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Well, what happens when Sparty has two kids and he can't raid as much? Well, guild falls apart, right? Because it's relying on that one person that has done everything from cooldowns to, to swaps to everything. And it's tough. But this way, you increase the longevity of your players, and you're really developing them. Like I love the teaching aspect of what we do. So that's something that's been done really well. You always have to adapt and change some of the strats around. And you know what? This person that's in your group may have no idea how to do, strats, right? They have no idea how to assign cooldowns. You think, a DPS where he knows how to assign killing cooldowns? Probably not. But that's why, you have some veterans and you have people that have, done this a bunch of times to really teach them, right? And share some of that knowledge. And you know what? We're all learning from each other, right? That's the goal rather than just being a bunch of soldier lemmings that can, follow things for the most part. So that's something that's been done really well. Um, I want to do
Well,
one more. So the other thing that we do is, sorry, I know I could be talking. The other thing that we've learned to do really well is something called Together Tube. So while we're teaching each other these encounters, and we've all done the prep and Fat Boss and the YouTube guides and Wowhead, But while we're teaching each other these bosses, we're watching a video together. So it's called TogetherTube. You're able to input a YouTube link and you pause it, start it together, where everybody's in the same room watching the exact same thing as you're explaining it, which is awesome. And that's been really invaluable going into one tier to another.
Well, one of the things that I was
Sorry, I
going
took a
to
breath there. Go
say,
ahead.
that's okay. I was just, you cracked me up. Those are all great things. But if you look back, because I've been through, you've been doing this for happy 14th anniversary here in just about
Oh
a
yeah,
week.
7 days. At 7 days is our 14th
Days.
anniversary as a
Yeah.
guild. Yeah, next
Um,
podcast. Perfect.
just watching the last 6 years, because it's almost been 6 years since you and I met,
Oh,
of
fantastic.
strat planning and just the players' development.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about some of your new applicants 2 years ago, they're now the ones leading the strats
Right?
and all of the things that and coming up and reading logs when they could barely look at them when they walked in the door. And it's incredible to see that kind of growth and see it passed on. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of learning in there too, because we're all human beings. We make mistakes. And it's interesting to watch as we continue to grow. It's really exciting. So you've talked about strats, and we've talked about learning from some of our past failures. What about your roster? What do you do with that?
So a roster is something that we constantly evaluate, and part of it is you need to get a good pulse check on your raiders to see how they're doing, how burnt out they are, whether it's Azurite power or whatever. But always you're evaluating your roster in terms of, okay, well, how reliable is this person? Is Sparty getting worse with age? Should we replace him? Should we take him out back? It's those kind of things that you're constantly looking at, and with roster changes, sometimes people are going to burn out. We lost a key member this past the end of this raid tier, Zaranya, who was invaluable. He just didn't like the direction of the game, and that's totally fine. He gave us months' notice, so we knew well in advance. We've been trying to find a replacement, but you know. You can't replace people like that. It's so tough because he was invaluable with logs, a fantastic theory crafter, an even better player, amazing at weak auras. So it's going to be a good punch in the gut for us, but also a good wake up call and also an opportunity for people to step up. That's the big one. So some roster changes you can't plan for, right? Some people are, real life's going to happen. The intention for me was to be raiding this entire time as much as I want to retire and showing up late. But at the same time, like I've got 2 kids and I can't leave my wife alone to deal with a screaming 2-year-old that wants to go to or doesn't want to go to bed and a 2-month-old that wants to feed. So roster changes, you need to really plan in advance. And there's that old army. I don't know which of you army people are out there where 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Where you need to really have that bloat. Where if you don't have if you have just enough. Well, guess what? Real life is going to happen. Someone gets hit by a bus. People are going to win the lottery. They can't log on because their internet's down or whatever. And guess what? You're screwed. You are going to lose 30 ranks on that boss because you're missing a warlock, because of BlizzCon, because you're missing a couple players. So one of the biggest things is get bloat. Like you need a large enough team, and my sweet spot has always been about 27 mythic players for a mythic roster, and that's like solid full member players. And the struggle is always there. You're always recruiting. You're always looking for players that are the right level of play, that that have the same drive as you do to improve, that have the right community feel, and each guild is different. Some guilds don't care about that stuff. They just want the good players, and then that's fine. But I think in Death Jester's case, it's much more difficult to find that right fit. But at the same time, when we're looking for players, that fit's going to be a long term fit. So when you're going into a roster, you're looking at with your large bench, you're looking to plan on who is in on what encounter. So again, we have spreadsheets of like, hey, these are the bosses. So Scan and Sev did an amazing job where they set up all the bosses, days in advance, and this person's doing this many bosses, this person this bosses. So they had everything already set up. You're not doing it the day of. And again, it's out of respect to your raiders and being an efficient raid lead. You have things set up in advance where you know which tank's going to be on this boss, which DPS, what their assignments are, all that stuff. So when it comes to the boss, you're just going to rotate them in. You have very little decision to do. But part of it is deciding on who is going to be on which encounter. And one of the questions people ask, well, how much am I going to see? How much progression am I going to see? Part of that is based off the criteria that you guys have as raid leads for who you want to bring to the raid. Part of it's composition, right? You're going to do Jade Fire Masters. You probably want a bunch of hunters because they're going to deal with the magma traps really well. That's a composition issue. Other bosses, you want a decent split, like Opulence, right? You want a decent split of mobile, um, DPS for the right side, and strong casters for the other side, and good balance. Other bosses, you're going to stack range like Mithrax. So composition is a big one. The other big stuff that you look at is reliability, right? Like I'd rather have a good player that is super reliable. And what does reliable mean? Can do mechanics, can get the interrupts, right? Because that's kind of stuff that's going to wipe you. They can think on their feet. If you're not hitting, 99th percentiles, not the end of the world, right? But if you are an intelligent player and you're learning from your mistakes and you're a good person to be around, that's more important than those glass cannons that you know die pretty quickly, but do a lot of damage. So those are some of the criterias when I'm looking for setting up a team. And as we've developed our raid leads here, they've developed their own sort of criteria that is very similar in terms of, well, who's going in for this boss. But ultimately, it's based off one philosophy that we've adhered to, and that is what is best for the guild, right? Sometimes what's best for the guild is sitting one of the raid leads, and that's okay too. So there's lots of little things to look at, and it's constantly in flux, right? You're constantly changing, what's best for this encounter, or best the situation, and what, you're gonna make mistakes, and that's okay. It is totally fine to make mistakes, own them, and improve.
Well, and just so you know, we're a little more casual. Some of our criteria, when we speak of reliability, is just being there. With a weekend team in 2 days, we're a little more casual and flex. So we have a larger roster than you do, simply because we could have up to 6 people out.
Yeah, for
So we
sure.
want to be able to give them that flexibility. We will see how well that works tomorrow when we max out at 30, but that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I think it's a good problem to have, and I recall, plenty of nights where we'd have 30 players, or we'd pull in, other retired players to fill a heroic raid. So it's a good problem to have, and then you can just it's a good clean slate for a lot of players too. So players that have been doing a lot of progression, or that are new, the fresh apps out there, this is your time to shine. This is your clean slate. You want a core spot. You're in a 30-person guild. You want a core spot on that mythic team. Do your best. You need to beat their players. And that's what I tell some of my apps too. I'm like, listen, you got to sweep the leg there, Johnny. I want you to be the best damn, paladin or hunter or mage in this guild. Yeah, so and so is the main character. Like they're the full member, but I want you to beat them. Like that is your goal. It's not to be as good as them. It's to beat them. You are to steal their core spot. That's how good I want you. So yeah, we definitely want players that have that drive to succeed, and that drive to constantly improve. And yeah, I mean the reliability is obviously there. We have players that can't always be around. Sparty's unreliable because he's got friggin' 2 kids, right? And so maybe that's somebody you don't want in a raid, and that's totally fine, right? Like it's totally fine. I mean, it sucks because I'm miserable not raiding, but that's a different story.
That's a different story. Well, what about the strat planning? I mean, we talked about it, and we've talked about it on different levels. Mistakes from the past, what we're doing going forward. What do you guys do now? And one of the biggest things that I think that we need to talk about is the difference between a team who killed the current content and is done for the tier and is rating one night a week, and teams that are still progressing or still working on bosses. When do you find time to plan for a next tier? So, for example, we finished our tier off 3 of 8 mythic, which
Hmm.
for I think for a
For a
first
brand new
team
team,
that
that's
raided together
fantastic.
for the first time, I think we did great.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Um, but we haven't. It's not like we had weeks to plan for this newest raid.
no, you didn't. And I mean, in a situation where death jesters here, we typically have weeks or months because we tend to kill the content well in advance, right? At our general pace. So it gives us plenty of time to do, 1 day, 2 day week rating, and get a lot of behind the scenes stuff done. And, given that, we've had a bit of a leadership turnover with myself sort of retiring and then moving up 2 new officers to really replace me, it's been a lot of learning and a lot of molding to get those guys in the right spot, and the same thing with new veterans and new members. It's a lot of molding and adapting. So when is the right time? You try to constantly do it. Like you're constantly touching up on, okay, this person needs to work on this a little bit more. Sometimes you're testing your members and involving them in the leadership team. Maybe they're not vets yet, but they've shown a lot of promise and initiative. Holy crap, is initiative hard to find, right? If you have players that have the time and desire to put in more effort, and you trust them to do it, by all means do it. You throw them in situations, whether it's recruiting or log analysis or whatever, right? If you have people that want to help out, great, and just continue to develop those guys. In our situation, yeah, we've been doing 1 2 day week rating for a long time. We've had plenty of time to prep, and the last week or so, we've been doing our strat sort of presentations and strat discussions, and we're finishing them up tomorrow, which should be great. In terms of strat planning, like we have a ton of there's a ton of resources out there. I'll link them all to you guys. I have, I don't know, like 8 different spreadsheets, and there's a P2B guide and Crypax guide, which Limit uses, and Fresh's guide, and there's a tanking guide that's really good from Sunyear's Art of War. There's the new Angry assignments for each thing. There's Jarathi's guide from Zeros to Heroes. There's so many things out there that that we are using as resources, and all these week courses. So part of it is just sharing it with the rest of the class, and putting up on your forums or your discords or whatever it is, and pinning those things. But I guess the big thing when we develop these strats as raid leads, as these guys gain more experience, you learn to develop these strats around your team's strengths and weaknesses. So just because, Limit did this thing really well, doesn't mean it's going to work really well for your guild, because you may not have the same composition or the gear or the skill or whatever. And a great example of that is when going through the Conclave strat, some guilds were keeping Paku up, and you'll learn about Paku, basically has a massive haste speed thing, and the mages were spell stealing it, right? So they brought in like 10 mages to spell steal this basically permanent bloodlust for the encounter, and the mages were doing crazy amounts of damage. Well, not every guild's going to be able to mimic that strat, because number one, the strat may change. Number two, they're not going to have those kind of mages, nor the mages at the same skill level. So you want to develop your strats around your team's strengths and weaknesses, whether it's, hey, Midge's team has no warlock, so that sucks. Let's not use a warlock strat. Or, you have a really strong melee. Awesome. Let's try to really push the melee damage on this one. How can we make the melee's life a lot easier? Or if, you have really amazing healers, well, let's just underheal it. Like it says, bring 4 healers. We're going to bring 3 because our healers are amazing and our players are generally good at, standing out of shit. So we're going to bring another DPS. And the other big thing is really involving your team, right? It's not just about, what Sparty says goes, and Sparty is, the ultimate ruler of all these strats. No, you really need to involve the rest of your guys, because guaranteed Sparty doesn't know, everything or anything sometimes. But you have to involve the guys that are really good on your team. So if you ask me stuff about demon hunters, no clue. That's what Zorani was for, and he did a lot of the melee stuff. You ask me stuff about boomkins, I know they look really stupid, and I know they cast moonfires and shit, right? Like that's Severus' domain.
Will appreciate that.
Yeah, the stupid boomkin thing. Anyway, so you look at players that that know what they're doing, and you involve them in the process. And what that does is that creates a larger ownership and stake of theirs in the strats and in the guild, right? If players are have more ownership of these strats and the guild and everything you're doing, they're going to be much more loyal to your guild. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to build as well.
Okay, so let's talk about goals. You asked me a really interesting question last night. You said, "What's your goal for your team for this next tier?" And I said,
okay,
I'd like to do at least.
Sorry, let me cut in. What is the difference? So before we preface this one, what is the difference between an aspiration and a goal?
Well, an aspiration is I would like to be method, but a goal is something I can achieve. How's that?
Yeah, so like the aspiration for Midgettes' team is to get cutting edge, right? Is it going to happen on a brand new team? Probably not. So what is your next goal for this next year?
Well, I'd like to see us get at least 2 more mythic bosses than we did this year. So I'd like to see us make it to 5 of 8. Are there 8 bosses? However many there are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation. I could see, you getting six done of the bosses as well, right? I mean, it's again a lot of growth and a brand new team and a lot of leadership development. Yeah, I mean, I could see you guys doing six for sure, as well as a lot of the new, like the other Zeros to Heroes teams that have really
So
built their
it's nine
core.
bosses. See, I haven't even looked at all the bosses yet, so I haven't finished prepping all the coaches'
You
corners,
still
right?
gotta, we have Coach's Corner. You still have a week to do it, right? You guys
Well,
raid on the
we
weekend.
we were still working on Zekfaz and potentially going to do the next one, but we
Yeah,
didn't get there.
but look at the tenacity on that team. You guys pushed until the last week to get another boss down, to get new people their kill, the people that hadn't been in there, right? Like that is grit and tenacity, and that says a lot about the team for sure.
I think I'm prouder. We had a choice. We could have taken the people that we had and went on to the next boss, and we probably, with enough time, we might have even gotten 4 of 8 mythic. But it was more important to the team and to the leaders to get everybody the achievement for all 3 bosses.
I think that says
So
a
we
lot.
got everybody in.
Yeah, no, I think that says a lot about your teams, which is fantastic.
Well,
Uh,
let's talk about Azurite next levels, because I know my team doesn't have the same goals as yours, and I'm curious as to what some of the other teams are doing.
Yeah, so we actually had this question posed to us on Twitter by Barsanti or Scott Barsanti here. How many artifact power levels should your necklace have going into Battle of Dazar'alor, as I call it? Maybe I'll pose this to you guys there in Twitch chat that are listening. How many Azurite traits are you guys expected to have in your guild? Um, you know, with us, for instance, we had, because of how much burnout we were feeling in some of our players, and we didn't want to lose players, we had a really low bar in terms of Azurite. We set it at 36, right, which was super super low in terms of mythic guilds at this level. And we really wanted to get a lot of feedback from our own guys, like, hey, like, do you guys think this is okay? Do you think it's too low? I had my own personal thoughts on it, but in general, we agreed. Okay, 36 is super easy. Like, I'm 38 and I'm nearly 39, and some, like, I took days off. Like, I didn't do any AP for like weeks, right? Like holidays, no way did I have time. I do a couple world quests and I do an emissary, but that was it. So 36 was a super super easy goal where, like, you could just do the ship missions and like screw around here and there, and you were super easy to do it. Again,
Well, I'm almost to 37,
well, there
so
you go, right? And I mean, you played a bit more casually, and you spend more time pet battling or doing other important stuff like managing our guild finances than doing world quests, and that's fine too, right? And people sometimes don't love islands, and a lot of these other ones here. So Kaiser's at 43 was the minimum. Yeah, 55. The cap is 50. Gears Hunt. Yeah, some of them have some pretty high ones of 41 here. I think 34 is pretty reasonable. 38 does unlock your multiple rings, which is pretty much the standard. So most mythic guilds expected an Azurite level of 38. Which is totally fine. Again, looking at our own sheet, our median was 38. Most are 38 to 41, I think, at this point. And of course, those are those damn no-lifers that just like to do 300 world quests. Friggin' yeah. Anyway, so it depends. Depends on your team's expectations, and some guys, they have to do it on alts. Like, they need this many traits with alts, and that's just crazy. You know what? I cannot commit the same time as I used to. Like, I cannot commit 8 hours a day to Warcraft as I used to, because again, different obligations, different time in my life. I certainly miss it, but at the same time, what is reasonable for our players who are working professionals in their 30s, and some of us in our 20s, some of the monks in the guild. Well, I mean, 38 was totally fine. So again, it depends on your team. But I
well,
think,
and you want to keep it reasonable though.
yes.
And I thought, and I copied something in here, and it came from one of the other raiders on Kib, which you've heard me speak of him, and he says, uh, and keep in mind, he's not fond of the AP grind any more than most of everybody else. It's ridiculous at the top end. There's also a degeneracy in the community where people will always try to copy the requirements of top world guilds when their guild clears contents at least a month later.
But yes, if only Mythic Plus was a good source of AP. Yeah, he tweeted that back what December of
Back
20.
in December, yeah.
Yeah, and so personally, I like the AP grind. I like that constant grind of something to do. Not everybody enjoys it, and that's fine too. So the big thing with a lot of these guilds is, you're in a top 150 guild, but you're seeing what Method and Limit are doing, and they're doing all these split raids, and you say, oh, we should do split raids like that guild. Maybe not like 10 split raids, but we should do one. And the amount of bang for your buck that you're going to get at that level is so minimal for the time investment, in my opinion, that it's just absolutely not worth it. We haven't done split raids in a bunch of tiers. Other guilds around our level do. There's other guilds around that level that raid more days, certainly more days than us. It's yeah, I mean, you're getting to these bosses months after, and these guys are doing split raids, and that speeds up their gear acquisition, right? They're playing these bosses at a gear level that you will have months later. So the comparison can't be the same, right? In terms of neck levels as well, where okay, you're expecting your players to have, 41, 42 traits that some of these top guilds do, but I mean, you're only 3 out of 8, right? You're only 3 out of 8 midgets. So that would be a really unreasonable and unrealistic expectation, for instance, for midgets to have, of her players to have 41 traits, right? Because it's completely not the same. By the time you get to, where Method's done some of these bosses, yeah, you'll probably have 41. You'll be getting, these higher traits, right? You'll be doing easily one trait per week again.
Well, and there are people who enjoy it and overachievers. Perdition is, I think he's at 41 or 42, and he's awesome and he loves it and he does a great job and he has fun.
You know,
But we raid 6 hours a week and we're not going to need all of that. So we talk about it and people ask, so how as a raid leader do you sort of make that goal, because I made it a goal for our team. I didn't make it an expectation. So we need to quantify that. But when you're setting these goals up, how do you pick your numbers?
so one of it is looking at the actual numbers themselves. Well, how much AP can you get per week, right? Like, what is the average of, minimal effort, a little bit of effort, doing AP stuff for 1 hour a day, right? Like, what does that look like? Part of it is, well, at a heroic level or mythic level, how much AP do I need to unlock this set of rings, right? Like the DPS traits or the healing traits or whatever. Part of it is, well, what are the other guilds doing around my level? I'm not looking at what Method's doing. The crazy numbers when they're just nonstop looking in those Azure Island, the island expeditions rather. I'm looking at, well, what are the other like top 60 to top 150 guilds doing, right? What is reasonable, because we don't want to have an unreasonable expectation at our level, and a similarly WoW Progress ranked guild is something much more lenient, right? Because it puts a lot of pressure on your players. And frankly, the last couple of months has been a really good time for our players to play other games and to relax and unload, rather than just grind the crap out of Mythic Pluses. So, I mean, there's a lot of math behind it. But, I mean, you look at what's reasonable, you look at what your guildies think as well, and you definitely want some feedback because, you want them to be heard and they want to be heard as well. So get some of their input when you're setting these expectations and some of these goals as well.
Well, and keep in mind, 33, I believe, is the one that gets you through the most beneficial rings of your Azurite armor. Is that my understanding of it?
It depends on the
If
item
through
level.
heroic, and then 36 or 38 is mythic.
I believe it was 38 heroic, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong there. Was it 300,
Now you get your
400?
first three traits, which your first three traits are the most important ones.
No, I'm thinking Mythic 38. Yeah, Mythic 38 will get you your spec ring, your primary ring, and your roll ring. Yeah, your defensive ring is your second last one, and then your power mode was even higher, right? So the absolute highest you could have right now is 48 in your Mythic shoulders. Um, Generally you wanted 38 for your Mythic shoulders, which are your Mythic highest piece, for your roll ring. So you'll have the most out of your DPS or HPS traits by that level. If you're a normal heroic guild, I mean, by all means, if you're 35, 36, you are totally fine because you're going to be unlocking almost all of your traits at this point. So yeah, it was
And then,
36 for heroic, 38 for mythic. Yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense.
So having the goal of 36, which is why I picked that goal. And then I said at least 33.
Yeah.
Because we do have, again, we have lighter things. But what happens? So I made the goal. Nobody's going to be penalized for not making the goal.
Hmm.
What happens if you make it an expectation? And then what do you do with those people who don't make it?
I
How do you
think
handle those?
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty in-depth discussion. Well, I mean, if you have expectations, um, part of the answer is it depends. So let's say, the expectation is for me to get 38. But you know what? I have a lot of, work and real life stuff and health stuff come up. But my raid lead said, if you're not 38, you're off the team, right? You can't raid. Well, what about all these like real life things? Doesn't real life come first? Yeah, absolutely, right? So, if let's say we set the expectation at 38 and a player came to us and said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to have a lot of difficulties hitting 38 because of all this stuff going on right now." Um, yeah, of course, you work with them, you see what you can do. Like, hey, you know what? If you're around, I will carry you through islands, right? You really want to work with some of those players. When you set expectations, though, part of the issue now is enforcing those expectations. So depending on what kind of situation you're sitting in, let's say you're sitting there with 25 raiders, and one of your raiders, let's say Midget's here. I set the expectation of 38, and she was one of my core healers, and she has 36 traits, 37 traits. But I've now told everybody, hey, you guys need to be 38 traits, or else you can't raid. Well, okay. Do you sort of go back on? So let's say Midgets is, she doesn't have a real reason as to why she's not 38. She's just really lazy. She just
I
doesn't like.
wanted to pet battle.
She just wants to do pet battles, right? And I mean, she'll do the pet battles that give you AP, but most she just wants to go collect pet battles and collect transmogs and not do what's beneficial for the raid, because she doesn't understand how powerful these damn traits are. And it's not, I mean, in Death Justice, it's not about just AP. It's about doing things together as a team and building those bonds, right? It's not just about world questing. It's about being online together and, the camaraderie there. So what do you do? I mean, do you enforce the expectations? Well, Midgets, you can't raid now, right? Well, if we go back on our word and say, okay, well, we really need Midgets to heal, that potentially undermines the integrity of my word. Like I've set the law here, and she's broken the law, but I say, okay, well, it's Midgets, I like her, and we really need her, so I guess it doesn't apply to her. So that really undermines the integrity of your leadership team. So if you're setting expectations, you need to enforce expectations, right? And you might get into a tricky situation of like, hey, I have 20 raiders. Midgets is my lazy pet battler that doesn't want to do AP stuff. Do I raid with 19 players? It's a tough call to make. I have made that tough call in the past, and sometimes I've had to underman bosses, right? And sometimes it's the right call to make, and sometimes it's not. But I mean, it always depends.
I do think it depends. And I will tell you from my point of view, and one of the reasons I didn't make them as expectations with my new team is because I want to see where the team itself goes. However, I come from an old school Mythic Raider, min maxing, and if I was truly focused on a progression team, I would understand those are some of the requirements. And so and you have the challenges with the other players. Um, I think the biggest thing you can learn from it is if you put those expectations out there, there are several things that you need to do. You need to be proactive with the player prior to it getting to the D Day. But if you're going to put a consequence, the consequence has to be enforced because in my opinion, you're telling the other 24 raiders or 25 raiders or 27 raiders or 31 raiders that they don't have to either. And it's not fair to them or their time. And so then you get into some really tricky things. So the best thing that I can say is never put out something that you're not going to enforce. And if you want something to be that hard of a line, then you make sure you empower your team to do that. And then you be prepared, I guess, to lose the player.
Yeah, that's sort of like when I'm dealing with my 2-year-old, and she doesn't want to come out of your car seat. So I'm like, okay, so you're gonna just sit right there. And she's like, okay, sit right here. And so she sits there. I'm like, damn it, I want her out of the car seat. That's not what I meant. So yes. I mean,
Well, I can tell you that I can think of many a time and that I sat right there with my child.
yeah. And so I'm like,
For
okay,
just
we're gonna
that
wait here.
reason. So you learn what you're going to enforce.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a constant power struggle with kids, but I mean, with that situation, yeah. I mean, it's expectations, and it's undermining your leadership team. At the same time, it's potential damage to morale of like, hey, well, we're carrying this person. Like, well, again, it comes down to what, one important thing: what is best for the guild, right? That is the most important thing, right? What is best for the guild. So as we wrap up here on our, getting ready to do Battle of Dazar'alor, what is your plan for prep, midgets, going into this next week? You have 1 week now, so raid comes out on Tuesday. Some changes there. I'm sure you're gonna get your alchemy trinket ready to go. Um,
No, I'm not. I'm not. I have almost all of the jewel crafting patterns, and I may not. I'll have to be sad because I'm not going after that. I expect Candlegate, so
yeah,
I
Candlegate.
will not be switching to alchemy.
Okay.
Um,
So outside of not switching to alchemy, what is your plan, right, for prepping for, prepping yourself for next raid tier, right? So, you may have looked at some bosses. But what is your plan over the next week? What are you planning on doing?
okay, so personally, when I'm preparing for raid, and right now I'm helping our raid leaders put stuff together. So a lot of the resources that we did for this podcast, I'm also sharing with them. I get the fortunate benefit of being able to see you guys discuss it, so that helps a lot. I need to spend some time on the healing and see what we're planning on there so that I understand the healing mechanics. Then one of the next steps that I'll do is I'll make sure that the debuffs that I need to track that are not trackable within Voodoo, which I use,
Hmm.
that I have them preloaded.
There's a lot of them. Yeah. So there's,
Yes.
quite a bit to do in terms of prep. I mean, this is also an exciting time. Like, I love this getting ready to go and, brand new raid. And, we only have 10 and a half hours of raiding to do a week. And, this is a super exciting time when new raiding content and new, dungeon content comes out. So I'm looking
Well,
forward to it.
I am too. The biggest challenge, though, is there's not as much resources as there usually is because I don't think there was as much testing. There's a lot of unknowns in the bosses, especially on Mythic.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I think you're right. I mean, there's no time, like, I can't do PTR testing anymore. Like, I used to years ago when I was not living on the East Coast and I could come home early from work to do some PTR testing, but these days no way. And unfortunately, like, most of my Coach's Corner videos are all Fat Boss, right? Like, there's a couple of actual testing videos, but again, we'll see how it is live going into this next tier. Yeah, I mean, there might be some fun changes
well,
and
and
some fun
another thing
bugs.
I'm going to do is I'm going to watch and highlight Sparty's Coach's Corner.
Ah, so with that, we're gonna wrap up this fine podcast. We're gonna do our coaches corner shortly, so catch us for that as well. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. Be excellent to each other, and as always, live your life heroically. Have a good evening.